Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hi, welcome to Elonomics. The Supreme Court of India is very angry. It thinks state and central governments which are involved in the stubble burning problem and air pollution in the north are not doing anything to tackle this. Earlier this week, it asked the governments to install purifiers, giant tall purifiers in Delhi and in the major Indian cities to purify our air. It is an emergency measure. But do these emergency measures work, or do we even have to resort to these kind of emergency measures? We have Professor Ila Patnaik, who's been tracking this problem. We've talked about this earlier when she talked about the paddy cause of air pollution in Delhi. And she thinks, actually she has some very good insights into how these emergency measures might work and what should be the long-term solution. Hi Ila, smog towers work in China, so they should work in India, right?
Well, you said smog towers work in China. Do we know that they work? Is there data? Is there data for air pollution? Do we know what measures have been taken? No, we don't. They're very recent. So it's not something that, could have been tested. But the second thing is there's a lot of lack of data, transparency from China. So we're not sure that we know whether they work or not.
Okay. So you have written the pros and cons of going in for emergency measures like smog towers when the problem is upon us. So is that the right approach?
So, on the one hand, one has to say that, talking like an economist, on the one hand, one has to say that when there is a problem that you're running high fever, whatever the disease might be, but if you're running high fever and you don't know, you may not even have diagnosed the problem, you do have to, do something about that, treat it, and you have to do something about the fever and to bring it down. So once you've created so much pollution that hospital beds are full, people are suffering. Today, even cardiac patients and stroke patients are finding it difficult to find beds in hospitals because of the respiratory problems people are having. So when you are in this situation where children can't breathe, you have to do something. And so, yes, you can think of emergency measures, but it is and is only a post facto emergency measure. It doesn't solve the problem.
But you have written about how the pollution in China, or what we know about the pollution in China, is different from the pollution what we are facing.
See, we don't know whether smog towers work or not, but what we do know is that they are used in China in places where there's a lot of industrial pollution, because China has these industrial zones, and in those zones they use smog towers. Maybe for them it is actually an optimal solution. First, because those towers might be cleaning the air of what they are producing. We don't know. Second, it might also be that instead of each person, each factory, putting its own air cleaning apparatus, they are doing a common cleaning of the air. They might be paying user charges, they might be paying taxes. I don't know all the mechanisms, and most of us don't know because the media doesn't talk about how the institutions work. But that might even be a long-term solution, because it's not as if it's very spread out. Our problem is quite different. I mean, you think of Delhi air pollution, it's not because Delhi is an industrial zone. We're not even very clear about what the sources of pollution are. A lot of the times it's construction dust, smog. At this time, it is stubble burning, garbage burning, urban garbage burning, vehicular pollution. So our kind of pollution is different. It is also more spread out. It is not just local. So a smog tower might be able to, clean the air for about a square kilometer. But and maybe about 70,000 people or so. Those are also all rough estimates. We don't know how they work. But that's a very localized solution for a broad-based problem. So that's one big difference one has to keep in mind.
And the NCR is a 20 million population region. It's about 2 crore people. So 70,000, a solution for 70,000 people. Just think of the number of towers you have to build.
It might be worth trying something. It might be worth allowing that a local government to have that option. That okay, if you can't do anything about smog about crop burning in Punjab, and things are really, really bad for you, you should be having that option. You should be able to install a tower if you want to. But the dangers with these kind of things is very often that because these things are visible, a chief minister of Delhi distributes gas masks. He's tweeted pictures of, children very kindly bowing and accepting gas masks from him. These visible things are always a little risky. They, give you political gains. You look like you're doing something, whereas it's much harder to solve long-term institutional problems. Just installing monitors all over the city, which function. A lot of the Delhi pollution monitors, most of the times you find they don't function. So the data is missing when we look at because we study that data and we find that is missing. So, those kind of hard work things get left out when there are these more visible, easy
solutions.
Absolutely, which are very good for for optics.
But you talk about state capacity, that the core problem being the lack of state capacity. Can you expand on why that state capacity is missing?
I mean, India as a whole has this problem, but let me give you an example from this issue. Last 2 months, going back to the stubble burning issue, you banned it. So that was, then of course, there's no state capacity to enforce the ban. So your solutions don't work because you don't have the capacity. You just do not have the capacity to enforce it. Then farmers turned up and said, now we didn't burn and we want the compensation that you were going to provide us. Now you don't have the capacity to assess whether they actually didn't burn and are then asking for money, or they burned the crop and are still asking for money. You just don't have that capacity to assess it. And the kind of instruments you use, like this blanket ban, which nobody can enforce. And all over the country we bring in, we do things which increase the workload on whoever is supposed to enforce those laws or the judiciary without thinking through the impact of those bans on that load. And, as a consequence, you just don't have the state capacity.
But there is state capacity to enforce odd even.
The odd even is very visible, concentrated, urban populations, but look at crackers. So we didn't.
Despite the ban, you can hear them going away. And the last point you make, Ila, that both India and China have focused only on engineering, and the long-term institutional issues have not been addressed. I can understand India to some extent because the problem is relatively new for us, but you say that has not happened in China either.
Yeah, so see, one of the issues, even they have, tried to put smog towers and solve the problem of air pollution in a way which is that, okay, once there is a problem, let's try and address it. We are going down that path. The long-term institutional issues would be, can we get regional governments to cooperate in such a way that each one has to take care of either paying the cost for a negative externality that they are producing, or somehow share those costs if there are positive externalities out of it. But those are arrangements which go back to coordination among governments, coordination that might take us back to where in the constitution do we find this sort of arrangement that if Punjab is not able to enforce the ban, then Punjab has to pay Delhi, or any such arrangements. These have been done in California, for example, after their Clean Air Act. And these are the kind of things that are required for a longer term solution, which actually, because it's a new problem for us, we haven't solved, and China, because it doesn't solve things like this, hasn't, and doesn't face those democratic pressures, perhaps hasn't solved. So we both try to look for
wheels within wheels and larger issues. Smog towers are an emergency measure. We need them, but we cannot solve the problem with smog towers. We need long-term solutions also. Please keep watching Elonomics. We'll be back with another episode next week, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.